What's good, everybody? It's Jay Pelham here from Pelham Jr. And I'm really excited about today's video because I was able to get my hands on a brand new creative distortion plugin by Waves called Berzerk. And so what's even crazier about today is that if you're watching this video on Black Friday, Waves is actually giving this thing away for free. That's right. So if you click the link below in the description, Waves is giving this thing away for $0. So that means even if you don't like me, or even if you don't like the video, which, I mean, of course you'll like me in the video, but I'm just saying, even if you don't, there's absolutely nothing that you have to lose by checking this thing out. As producers, as sound designers here at Pelham Jr., we were especially intrigued when we found out about this plugin. So, I decided to do a review / tutorial on this plugin. And as always, I won't dive super deep into all the parameters and features. However, Waves, they have the question mark icon at the top of their plugins, and they have plenty of great documentation so that you guys can really dive deep and go crazy, or dare I say, berserk with it if you really want to. So let's dive right in and you'll see exactly what I'm talking about. So just getting started, I have a session in Logic, but obviously everything that I'm going to do and show you today will work in any other DAW, pretty much on any other operating system. As a creative and musician, when I think of distortion and saturation, immediately what I think about is guitar. It doesn't matter if it's lead, bass, electric, or acoustic. It doesn't matter to me. Saturation and guitar go hand in hand. It's like peanut butter and jelly. Like they were absolutely made to go together. So what I did in this session, I pulled in a bass line from a sample pack that we have called Oversaturated. And Oversaturated is filled with tons of dope guitar loops, lead and bass. And I'll play it for you real quick. So nothing too complex, nothing too complicated, just something simple with a nice groove, right? And it already, as you can hear, has a little bit of, just a little bit of grit and saturation already baked into it, but nothing too crazy. But however, let's say if I'm creating a track and I want to do something different, I want to do something a bit out of the box, that's where a plugin like Berzerk can come in. So if we come down here, we can add Berzerk. So let's pull up an instance. And right here, we see the plugin. Real quick, I'm going to dive into the UI. But first, what I'm going to do for this example is I'm actually going to process it more as a mid-side plugin so that I can really focus in on like like a mono channel within the mix. So now that I have that set, there's plenty of stuff here to look at. I'll just go over all the parameters real quick. Immediately, what I notice are the input and output knobs. They're big and they're red, so that you could definitely make sure that you see those when you're doing your gain staging and your mixes. And if I play it, you can see the lights, these LEDs, indicators that are green when you have a signal that's not too hot. But if I crank the input gain, you can see that it goes red when it's clipping and it's yellow when it's almost clipping. Pretty standard stuff. As with most distortion plugins, there's a drive knob and you can do it for either more or less distortion. And I don't have it set too crazy, but one thing you notice that it doesn't affect the output gain as much, which I like. So I can crank it here, and yeah, it's louder, but it's not hitting me too hard. And so what I'll actually do, let me turn down this input gain, because when I crank this joint, you really gonna hear, you really gonna hear what it's gonna do. And headphone users, I don't wanna hurt you today. So let's keep it moving. Right here we have on the top right part of the plugin, this is really where a lot of the magic happens within Berzerk. We have a selector, a drop down called character, and it really just changes the tone or the type of distortion. right below it, there's a button that says Berzerk, and you'll see exactly what that does. So as I play, let me drive it a little bit so you can really hear it. Let's turn my loop on. So I'm gonna change it. So you can either select it from the drop down. Yeah, that's really crushed. Or you could just click it. If you just click on the drop down, it'll cycle through them. And here we have this like oscilloscope type view. And really, I think it's just visually proving to you that it's doing something. That's my take on it, but again, it's helpful, and you'll really see this change when we go into the Berzerk modes. So there's a bunch of different parameters, tones, textures that you can play with in here. So let's say we choose clipped. I actually really like this setting. So this is where, again, the magic happens. So there's a button that says Berzerk, and basically what it does is that when you click it, in addition to the character, it alters the tone, the grit, the tone, and the texture of the distortion, but it does so in like a randomized way. So the more you click this button, it's going to do something completely different. And I think Waves, what they were going for with this is that, again, this isn't just a run-of-the-mill, let's just add distortion and saturation to something. They really wanted to build this as a creation tool. And so sometimes when you're trying to find something new, something different, you may not exactly know what you're looking for. You just want something different. So they figured if you just click this button a bunch of times, eventually you'll find something that you might like. So let's try that out. And so you can see here, as well as here, that is actually changing the texture and the tone of the distortion. And there's a knob here that says density. It goes from order to disorder, but really you're just dialing in the intensity of the Berzerk effect to make it really apparent. So if we pull it back a little bit, and there's also a link knob, so you can link the drive and the density. So you can really do some crazy stuff with it if you automate one of these. And so moving on down, there's this HD button, and essentially what this is oversampling. And so oversampling is actually really important to have in a saturation or distortion plugin in the box, for reasons that can be articulated much better than what I can do. And so if you guys have time, search on YouTube for White Sea Audio. And so he's a really dope and knowledgeable guy. He does tons of plugin reviews, his infamous snake oil videos. And basically he has a video that talks about oversampling, what it does, what it is, and why it's important. And long story short, I'm glad that Waves included a button on this plugin to do that. Obviously it does use more CPU, but if you have the processing power to do it, then yeah, you should definitely check that out. But again, you should click any of these parameters with your ears and let that be the judge, not necessarily because you see HD, right? So moving on, real quick, I'll just go over the stuff in the bottom half of the plugin. We have a feedback control, and I'll actually go over this really shortly. It's really cool. It basically creates like a feedback loop of the distortion, and there's like a pitch and octave control here, and there's like a tonal element to the feedback loop. Excuse me, and the distortion that's happening there. There's a dynamic control, and basically there's a volume threshold, and you can trigger or attenuate the distortion based on the volume of the input signal, as well as a pretty standard 3-band EQ with Q and frequency sweep, as well as you can either boost or attenuate the EQ right there. At the bottom, we have this temperature knob. The temperature is basically just adding, it basically just changes the tone of the signal. So if I play it, so all the way turned up, it rolls off the top end and it adds like some girth to the bottom end, makes it sound really warm. That's why it's hot, you know, it's red at the bottom, but all the way at the, at 0, it's not really doing anything to the signal at all. So you could dial that to taste. Here's like a master, dry, wet mix knob, and here's the output. So now that we kind of know what this thing does, and I could go through parameters for days, but again, depending on when you watch this video, it's free. So I definitely would want you guys to check that out. But let's dive into this feedback setting, right? I thought this was really dope. So here we have a level. This is just like the volume of the actual feedback. This blend is like another mix knob. It controls the ratio of this to like your input signal. So if we crank it up a little bit. So just kind of diving into this. These are like pitch knobs. And so there's like a low and a high, and you can actually tune these to either a note. If you're in pitch mode, or if you go to frequency, you can just choose, kind of fine tune it to a specific frequency. There's a speed of the feedback loop you can adjust here. Again, it's more just turning knobs and seeing how that sounds. And then the type. So here, there's like a sine wave that kind of feeds into the feedback loop, or you can use the actual input signal to generate that feedback as well. And as you see here, when it's on input type, it follows the actual bass line. And it sounds weird, but we'll fine tune it to see what cool we can do with it. Or a sine wave. It's a lot less chaotic, and it even sounds more tonal when you use the sine wave. And then you can filter either high pass or low pass that feedback as well. And so you might be wondering, like, okay, like, yeah, that sounds kind of weird, but how might we actually use something like that in a song? So it really depends on what your application is. So my ear as a sound designer kind of lets me know that I could do some really cool stuff with this, right? So if we play around with this, with these pitch controls, right? So let's say we dial that blend all the way in. You can turn up the octave of the pitch. And if we sweep it, we almost get this cool like C3PO robotic digital sound. So you can do some really cool sound design stuff just with this alone, like connecting this to some kind of LFO or automating it, or just kind of recording, like you sweeping it or whatever. So that's one use case right there in and of itself, that you can kind of generate something new just with this plugin alone. However, there's a sidechain component to this that for me, I actually found was really dope. So imagine if instead of you just using Berzerk to generate distortion off of, your bass or whatever sound that this channel is on, but what if you feed it like, I don't know, some vocals or even drums to do something cool with distortion? So let's give that a shot. So I actually play around with it, and I made my own parameter just for the sake of time, but we'll go through that and see what that sounds like. And so what I did is I made a drum loop. I loaded up battery. And so these drums actually come from another Pelham Junior pack called Passive Hues. And so I'll preview these. So some really dope drums. That's also on the website as well, pelhamjunior.com. And so let's hear what I did. I just made like a 2-bar loop. Nothing too crazy, but something with a gritty hip hop vibe, right? All right, so now let's turn back on our bass loop and let's hear it without Berzerk. So by itself, I think it sounds pretty good, but again, it's nothing crazy, it's nothing out of the box. So let's see if we could do something cool with that sidechain using the drums on the bass guitar. So let's turn Berzerk back on. So let's open this preset file, and I call it tonal sidechain. So let's just hear what it sounds like and then I'll show you what I did to get to it. And so it doesn't sound like much right now, but let's say if I get rid of the output here on my drums, but then I feed it into the sidechain here on Berzerk. Now, one of the coolest things about this sidechain feature, and I'm so glad Waves did this, they included an actual audition button here on your sidechain, so you can just listen to whatever your sidechain is by itself. Really helpful. So if I click that, we hear that the drums are actually coming in as the sidechain. So that much is working. And let's turn this down so that we can really hear what we're doing here. So essentially what I did is now I have this to be type in, so the feedback is based off of the input signal. And then in the sidechain section here, I'm using an external source, which is my sidechain source, the drums in our case, to trigger that feedback. So now the feedback can actually have a rhythmic element that goes along with the drums, and it can even become its own texture depending on how we use it. So now it's not just noise anymore, it's actually moving with the drums. And so if we go here to this dynamic tab, essentially what I did was I used this threshold. It's just a volume threshold. And so these red lines here indicate the relative volume or gain of my input. And so I can set the threshold because what I wanted to do in this case was to have it trigger more near the snare. So my snare is kind of louder than everything else. So I had it not focus on the lower frequencies, but kind of like the mid frequencies and up to really catch that snare drum. And also what I did here, so if I pull this high pass back, you hear it's still almost like catching the kick drum here. So what I ended up doing was I high pass filtered a little bit, filtered out some of the lows from the feedback. So you hear it change more so on the snare again. So let's mix it back in and see what it's sounding like now. So I got my bass coming back in now. And then also changed the temperature of it, just added a bit more warmth to it, wrote off some of the high end. And so I know that the bass in this particular loop is in A minor. And so you can change it to the pitch. So you can have the pitch here and you can link these two together. And so let's say if we wanted these to be A. But then I can link these back together. Go back to frequency. And I can fine tune it. So it's more or less in tune with my sample. All right, cool. So I kind of like that, and then we'll blend it some more. Let's see what it actually sounds like when we bring our drums back in. And then I could just play from there. I can either change the character of the distortion. I can hit Berzerk. Then I can play with the pitch. There's tons of stuff you can do with this thing. I could blend it back in. So just imagine what else you could do with this. Let's say if you fed this into some other bus and then put some other processing or reverb in it, and you could even create your own texture that could just go along with your drums and whatever else you have in a session. And that's really just the tip of the iceberg with this. But what are my thoughts on this thing? Essentially, I like it. I think that it's something new, it's something different. Waves, you can tell they actually use some imagination with this thing, and they didn't just make another run-of-the-mill distortion plugin, because they have tons of distortion plugins, and there are others out there, but they needed to do something to stand out and to differentiate themselves. Yeah, this is definitely yet another tool that you can add to your toolbox to help you get that new sound, that new texture, that new thing that will spark inspiration for your next track. A lot of times, you know, especially me as a producer and a sound designer, I'm looking for something new and something unique, but I may not always know how to get there or what that new sound or new texture is. And so it's just, again, just another tool that I can, you know, pull from the box and just try something new, try out new stuff. They're basically giving this thing away. So I definitely encourage you guys to check this thing out. Let us know what you think about it. And yeah, we love to even hear what you guys do with it. Whether you are new to the channel or if you are a frequent viewer and you've seen all of our stuff before, we always truly appreciate all the support that you guys give us. If you like this video and all the other stuff we got going on, please consider subscribing. Click that notification bell and hit us up at our website, pelhamandjunior.com, and also on social media at Pelham and Junior. Click the link in the description. Check out Berzerk. Waves also has a massive sale going on their site, so you can check out that and all the other stuff they have going on, as well as Pelham and Junior. We have a huge sale, our biggest sale of the year, for Black Friday, so definitely be sure to check that out. I got links also to our other packs like Oversaturated, like Passive Fuse, and all the other stuff that we got going on. But yeah, as always, it's J Pelham here from Pelham and Junior. And I don't know about y'all, but I got a hot date with a turkey sandwich. So that's where I'm about to get to. So I'm gonna get up out of here and I will talk to y'all later. Peace.